Every system that has ever collapsed in human history collapsed the same way. Not with a bang, not with a warning siren, not with a government announcement that politely asks you to start panicking. Every single one collapsed slowly, then all at once. And the people living inside it, buying groceries and paying rent and scrolling their phones, didn't see it coming. Not because they were stupid, not because the signs weren't there, but because by the time the signs became impossible to ignore, the window to do anything about them had already quietly closed. By the time you see all 5 signs I'm about to show you, it's already too late. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Weimar Germany, the Soviet collapse, Argentina, Lebanon. These aren't ancient cautionary tales from civilizations that didn't know any better. These are modern, functioning societies with educated populations, central banks, supermarkets, and internet access, and they fell anyway. In every single case, the population was living inside the collapse for months, sometimes years, before they collectively accepted that it was real. There's a concept in systems theory called a tipping point, and that explains more about how civilizations die than almost anything else. A tipping point is not the moment things get bad. It's the moment the system loses its ability to recover. Before that point, stress accumulates, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. The system bends, it compensates, it patches itself. It issues reassurances. And because it keeps functioning, because the lights are still on and the ATMs are still dispensing and the shelves are still mostly full, people interpret the bending as proof of strength. But bending under increasing load is what happens right before the break. The terrifying thing about tipping points is that they're invisible until you've already crossed them. The day before a currency collapses, it still buys things. The week before supply chains fracture, the shelves are still mostly stocked. The system looks functional right up until the moment it doesn't. And that transition can happen faster than any individual has time to respond to. This is what separates people who survive collapse from people who don't. Not physical strength, not wealth, not luck. The ability to read the early signal, the faint tremor before the earthquake, and act on it before the crowd does. Because the resources that keep you alive are finite. When the system breaks and the crowd finally wakes up, those resources get consumed in days, sometimes hours. If you saw it coming 3 months earlier, you ate well. If you saw it coming 3 days earlier, you stood in a very long line. If you saw it the morning it hit, you went home to empty shelves. So, here are the 5 signs, not as abstract theory, as concrete, observable, real-world signals that have appeared in roughly this sequence across every major societal collapse of the modern era. Pay attention not just to what each sign is, but to why it gets ignored, because the ignoring is the trap. The first sign is currency instability. And before you skip past this because you think you already understand inflation, don't. What I'm describing isn't inflation. Inflation is when prices go up. What I'm describing is subtler and far more dangerous. It's when the pattern of prices changes. There's a difference. Inflation is a headache. A pattern shift in currency behavior is the early tremor of an earthquake. Here's what it looks like on the ground. Prices start rising in specific categories first, food and fuel, because these are the things people cannot stop buying. Then they start moving unpredictably, jumping week to week instead of month to month. Then the government issues reassurances, and that is the tell. Governments issue reassurances about currency stability for exactly one reason, because the currency is unstable. You watch this happen in the United States between 2021 and 2023. The Federal Reserve called inflation transitory for the better part of a year, while grocery bills climbed and fuel prices hit levels most Americans hadn't seen in decades. The official message was, this is temporary, this is manageable, this will correct itself. And most people believed it, because the money still worked. You could still buy things, still get paid. The discomfort was real, but it was normalized, filed under, things are a bit rough right now, instead of, this is a warning. In Venezuela and Zimbabwe, ordinary families were doing that exact same mental math. This is rough, it'll get better, right up until their savings became functionally worthless. The currency still existed, it just couldn't do what currency is supposed to do. And by then, the people who trusted the temporary narrative had nothing left to reposition with. The survival implication is this: when currency becomes unreliable, the psychological architecture of trust that holds modern society together begins to erode. Cash, your ability to exchange past labor for future goods, starts feeling less like a guarantee and more like a gamble. And once that feeling spreads from the anxious early adopters to ordinary people making ordinary decisions at the checkout line, you are watching the foundational layer of civilization begin to soften. Everything that comes after is downstream of that single crack. The second sign is supply chain delays turning into supply chain gaps. And there's a specific three-stage progression here that almost everyone misses, because each stage looks like a temporary inconvenience rather than a warning. Stage 1, things are delayed. Orders take longer. Products go on backorder. In 2021, Americans got very familiar with this stage. Supply chain issues became the catch-all explanation for everything from empty car lots to bare toy shelves. Annoying, not alarming. Stage 2, things become intermittently unavailable. Your brand isn't there, but the category exists. There's a substitute. You adapt, compromise, and move on. Stage 3 is the one that matters. Category gaps begin to appear. Not just your brand of cooking oil, no cooking oil. Not just one manufacturer's antibiotic, limited antibiotics across the board. And here's what's insidious about this stage. It happens in cycles. The shelves aren't permanently empty, they're unpredictably empty. Sometimes the product is there, sometimes it isn't. That intermittency is the disguise. It makes the gap look like a fluctuation instead of a trend. In Lebanon, before the 2019 banking crisis, medication shortages were intermittent for months before they became chronic. People who stocked up during that window were fine. People who waited for certainty discovered that certainty and complete unavailability arrived at exactly the same moment. The psychological trap is what you could call the availability illusion. As long as something is available sometimes, your brain files it as available. We aren't wired to plan around intermittent scarcity. For most of human history, intermittent availability just meant seasons and cycles, and the next cycle always came. The idea that availability itself could permanently end is a cognitive leap that feels almost irrational to make without overwhelming evidence. By the time the evidence is overwhelming, the window is gone. The third sign is energy and fuel irregularity, and this one is the accelerant. Once it's present, everything else on this list moves faster. Fuel and energy aren't just commodities, they're the circulatory system of modern civilization. Food doesn't appear on shelves without fuel to move it there. Water doesn't come out of taps in most cities without electrical pumps. Hospitals don't function without reliable electricity. The early signs look familiar. Prices spike and stabilize at a higher level. Occasional outages get blamed on infrastructure or weather. Gas station lines appear during peak hours. People adapt and continue. The tipping point arrives when transportation begins to degrade. The moment fuel becomes scarce enough that distribution economics break down, supply chains, already stressed from sign 2, fracture in new ways, and this creates a feedback loop. Energy scarcity degrades supply chains, which worsens the economic pressure on fuel distribution, which deepens the scarcity. Each turn of the loop is faster than the last. Americans got a preview of this during the 2021 and 2022 fuel price spikes and the diesel shortage that followed. Truckers struggled with margins, grocery prices jumped overnight, farmers publicly warned about empty shelves. But the architecture of that cascade, the way one choked supply line immediately pressured everything connected to it, that's not a one-time glitch. That's how the system behaves under stress. And the next time, it might not resolve. The survival implication is mobility collapse. When fuel becomes unreliable, your ability to move, to reach resources, to escape danger, to source what you need becomes contingent on something outside your control. The person who recognized this sign early kept their tank full, mapped their nearest resource points on foot, and maintained options. The person who normalized it as just expensive gas discovered during the acute phase that they couldn't reach the one pharmacy with their medication because every road was paralyzed by people trying to get fuel at the same time. The fourth sign is institutional strain, and this is the hardest one to accept emotionally because it forces you to confront something that cuts against everything you've been raised to believe. The institutions you trust may not be there when you need them. Hospitals, banks, emergency services, government agencies, these are the load-bearing walls of the social contract. When you're sick, the hospital treats you. When you're in danger, the police respond. When the economy is struggling, the government acts. Most people have lived inside that promise long enough to treat it as a law of nature rather than what it actually is. In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 48 hours, second largest bank failure in American history. People with real money in that bank, businesses trying to make payroll, individuals with life savings, suddenly could not access their funds. The building existed, the website loaded. The institution was physically present, but the function was gone. And it happened faster than almost anyone had prepared for. The FDIC stepped in and the crisis was contained, this time. But the speed of it, the overnight reality of your money is inaccessible, was a clear preview of what institutional failure actually looks like in the modern era. Not a slow fade, a sudden freeze. In deeper collapses, that freeze becomes permanent. In Lebanon, banks quietly implemented capital controls months before they became official policy. Your money was technically in your account, you just couldn't withdraw it. The institution was present, the function was absent. And by the time most people fully accepted that this was the new reality, every option had already expired. The survival implication is psychologically difficult but essential. At some point in a collapse, the system will not save you. Not because the people inside it don't want to, most of them do, but because the system itself will be operating beyond capacity, with degraded resources, under circumstances it was never designed to handle. Building redundancy while the system still works, keeping some cash outside the banking system, maintaining a small supply of essential medications, building local relationships that don't depend on institutional function, that's not paranoia. That's the difference between having options and having none. Now, the fifth sign, the one that isn't about economics or energy or logistics, the one that's about people. The fifth sign is behavioral shift, and this is the one that tells you it's over. It starts with panic buying. Not the temporary kind before a hurricane where people stock up and then return to normal. This is sustained overpurchasing. People buying more than they need, not out of greed, but because their internal risk calculation has shifted. They're not buying extra because they want extra. They're buying extra because something in their brain has started doing math about scarcity, and that math produces an anxiety that only quiets when there's more in the cupboard. Individually rational, collectively catastrophic. Because widespread overpurchasing creates real shortages for everyone else, which validates the fear that drove the overpurchasing in the first place. A loop that doesn't need any external cause to accelerate. It feeds itself. Then comes hoarding. Hoarding differs in psychology, not just degree. Hoarders are responding to current scarcity. They're purchasing against imagined future scarcity, the worst scenario their fear can construct. Buying fuel cans when there's still fuel at the pump. Months of food while shelves are still stocked. Medications they won't need for years. Things that have zero relevance to their current life, but enormous relevance to the life they're terrified is coming. Then, the aggression. You've already seen versions of this in America. The spike in social hostility during the 2020 shortages, the fights in store aisles over toilet paper that became punchlines but were actually early data. When resources feel threatened, the baseline of human tolerance for other people contracts sharply. The unspoken social agreement that the stranger next to you is not your adversary begins to erode. And once it starts eroding, it moves fast. Because trust isn't linear, it's binary. Once enough people shift into, "I don't trust this anymore," their behavior makes it rational for everyone around them to shift too. The social fabric doesn't fray slowly, it tears. Here's the line I want you to remember. When people stop trusting the system has already collapsed. Not collapsing, not struggling, already collapsed. Because every system, every currency, every institution, every government exists and functions only on the basis of collective belief. The dollar is worth something because enough people believe it is. The hospital helps you because enough people believe it will. The entire architecture of modern civilization is a shared agreement maintained by collective consensus. And the moment the population shifts from consensus to doubt to rejection, the agreement ends. The buildings are still standing, the banks might still be open, but the belief that animates them, that makes them real, functional, trustworthy, is gone. And nothing that follows looks like the world that existed before. This is why behavioral shift is not a warning that collapse is coming. It is confirmation that collapse has already happened, at the level where it actually matters, inside human minds. Everything after this point is just the physical world catching up with the psychological reality. Now, look at all 5 together, because the individual signs are serious. The interaction between them is terrifying. Currency instability increases anxiety-driven purchasing. Anxiety-driven purchasing stresses supply chains. Supply chain stress worsens price volatility, which deepens currency instability. Energy irregularity fractures supply chains further while increasing cost pressure on everything else. Institutional strain removes the government's ability to intervene while simultaneously destroying the population's belief that intervention is coming. And the behavioral shift, the panic, the hoarding, the aggression, takes every one of those stresses and amplifies it. Because human behavior under fear is not rational, and irrational behavior in a fragile system is not a complication, it is fuel. They are not 5 separate problems, they are a cascade. Each one lowers the threshold for the next. Each one makes the whole system more brittle faster. And the cascade, once it starts, moves faster than any individual can track or respond to. This is why collapse always feels sudden, even when it wasn't. Venezuela's acute phase accelerated over weeks. Lebanon's banking freeze happened overnight. The Soviet collapse, after decades of slow accumulation, measured its final tipping point in days. The buildup is invisible, the break is not. Collapse isn't an event, it's a moment, the single inflection point where every accumulated failure activates at once, where every stressed threshold gets crossed simultaneously, where the slow bend becomes the sudden break. Now picture your city, your streets,
Your neighborhood, 90 days after all 5 signs go critical simultaneously. The ATMs still have machines, half of them are just out of cash. The others have withdrawal limits you've never seen before. The grocery stores are open, but 2 aisles are empty, and the prices on everything else changed 3 times this week. The gas station has lines around the block by 7 a.m. and runs dry by noon. Your neighbor, the quiet one you've waved at for years, is watching your driveway a little too carefully. That's not a movie, that's a Tuesday. That's what the physical world looks like after the psychological collapse has already happened inside the people living in it. The people positioned for what comes next are not the ones planning to prepare when things get worse. They're the ones who saw 3 of these signs and acted before the 4th arrived, quietly, without competing against a panicked crowd. When resources were still available and preparation was still calm and inexpensive and possible. History has never been kind to the populations that were probably going to be fine. It only records what happened to them. The next video covers what you actually do before this sequence completes. Not during, not after, but before, when the actions are still quiet and the options are still open. Because recognition, which is what today was about, is step 1. What you do with the recognition is everything. Don't wait for certainty. In collapse, certainty arrives after the options have already expired. Watch the next one.